Hello, everybody. Thank you all for tuning in to the third episode of the season. I'm just going to go ahead and jump right into our content for this week. So today my guest is Amy Marie Merrell, and she is the executive director of a nonprofit organization called the Cupcake Girls. So I actually found out about this organization through a class I took my sophomore year of college that basically required us to go out and find an organization that we wanted to volunteer for. It was like a community service-based class, and I came across this nonprofit. So now I'm obviously going to let Amy explain the bulk of what this particular nonprofit does and what it stands for, but I'm just going to go ahead and quickly read the mission statement so that you guys will have an idea about the topics we're going to be discussing today. So their mission statement, as stated on their website, is, quote, "We provide confidential support to those involved in the sex industry, as well as trauma-informed outreach, intensive case management, holistic resources, and referral services to provide prevention and aftercare to those affected by sex trafficking. We provide non-judgmental support to empower our clients in their pursuits through respect, resources, and relationships," end quote. So as a fair warning, on this episode, we're going to be discussing topics like sex work, sex trafficking, domestic and sexual abuse, etc. So please tread lightly if any of those things are difficult topics for you or triggers for you in any way or for whatever reason. All right, so now that all of that is out of the way, Amy, could you please just briefly introduce yourself and sort of give us a little more detailed look at what it is exactly that you do for the Cupcake Girls?
Yeah, so my name is Amy Marie Merrell, she, her. And my history and perspective comes from being in service and being a service provider with sex workers now, sex workers in crisis for the last 16 years. I've worked in various spaces as an advocate, program creator. I've also worked in domestic violence safe houses. And so through that work and through the work that I'm currently in as the Cupcake Girls executive director, it's my focus that we're making sure we're lifting up the voices of sex workers and the things that sex workers are asking for, that they're able to access those things. Our work at the Cupcake Girls truly is about collaborating with the community to ensure that sex workers' rights are visible, which our healthcare is a human right. So if we have a client that comes in and fills out a support request on our website, then we will get that support request and we ask them, well, what do you want? And the client will tell us, I want a dishwasher, or I want a washing machine, or I want to leave my trafficker, or I'm trying to figure out how to do taxes. I'm a sex worker and I've never done taxes before. And then we'll reach out to all of our business partners. We curate business partners by going into the community, going to doctors, dentists, lawyers, and asking if they'd partner with us at a discounted or pro bono rate so that we can go ahead and turn around and give those services to our clients. And so we'll do advocacy work with our clients from anywhere, usually it's about 6 to 9 months of advocacy, working with our advocates, our volunteer advocates, maybe once a week, most of the times bi-weekly, and we make sure that the clients are really achieving their goals and their timing, but everything is truly about self-determination. It's about empowering people in their pursuits and their timing, ensuring that they have the tools that they need to succeed in their lives.
Okay, great. So I did do my research before our interview, so I'm familiar with why you guys are called the Cupcake Girls, but can you just kind of share where the roots of that name came from for people that are not familiar?
Yeah, so the roots came from our founders starting the organization, actually going into strip clubs and brothels with cupcakes, and telling everybody about the resources that we were providing. And so whenever the founder would walk into the back rooms of the brothels or the strip clubs, people would yell out, "The Cupcake Girl is here." And so that's actually how we got our name.
Oh, so how did those interactions usually go? Like because you still do that, right? Like you guys still bring the cupcakes into those workplaces, and that's how you kind of like recruit your clients. So how does that?
Actually, we're pivoting quite a bit. So we I think the interactions in the clubs, it's similar to how if somebody were to walk into your work with a bunch of cupcakes and you were busy at work, right?
Yeah.
It would be like cool because you're getting a cupcake, and it's nice because you're getting a card about resources, but it's also kind of distracting. And so we've been really listening to the community and what the community is asking for. And so we're pivoting quite a bit and looking into providing just Narcan, hygiene things that the community is truly asking for in those outreach experiences. And instead of popping into the strip clubs once a month, really working with the managers and house moms to make sure that we have set times where we can bring in maybe one of our partners, a tax advisor, a lawyer, to talk about record expungements and things like that. So we're pivoting that piece quite a bit. But I think the most beautiful piece about the Cupcake Girls, in my experience, and I've been here for 9 years now, is the majority of our clients actually come from word of mouth. So they're not actually coming from our outreach. They're coming from clients referring one another to the Cupcake Girls.
Okay. Yeah. I work at a day club, not a strip club. It's obviously very different, but I can see how, like, you know, someone walks in with cupcakes in the middle of me having to deal with tables and stuff, you know, because it's not the exact same environment, but there is something, like, unique about Vegas and any type of club in general. You know what I mean? So, because you were in Oregon, right? So it's just a totally different environment than being in Las Vegas, right?
You know, there's a lot of differences, but there's a lot of similarities. The people in Vegas are so beautiful, and I've really enjoyed that. The heat definitely is different, but that's actually probably the only thing. That Nevada and Oregon have many, many similarities. But it's interesting you talk about the Oregon piece. I just want to say super quick. So I got started with the Cupcake Girls because of some things that had happened to me in my life. When I was a teenager, I had a friend that was a sex worker and was continuously assaulted by 2 police officers in Eugene, Oregon. And the friend told me, and we went to the police department and we're telling them, like, hey, this is going on. And she wasn't listened to because she was a sex worker. And so it took a couple of years, actually, of going back to the department, and we ended up finding out that there were over 40 women that had been assaulted by these officers. And that's really where my heart for the sex working community came into play, because I was like, she's just trying to make money.
Right.
She's literally just trying to survive. She was straight out of foster care, trying to do exactly what she needed to survive, and she couldn't even do that. And then in 2009, I moved to Portland, Oregon, and saw someone being assaulted on the street there. And when I had called the security guard and asked for help, the security guard laughed at me, and he said, she's a prostitute. They're just going to arrest her anyway. And so I ran upstairs, grabbed my phone, and ended up asking the police officers when they finally arrived, even though the woman was gone, that was being assaulted. I asked the police officers, is this true? And they were like, well, yes. And then I asked to speak to their managers because I didn't know anything about the police department at that time. They're not called managers.
Yeah.
But it ended up where I spoke to so many people in management that I ended up in front of Chief Rosie at the time, the chief of police in Portland, and or in Multnomah County, rather. And she said, you know, if you want to make any difference in this world, you need to either work to change the laws or get involved with grassroots nonprofits. But as police officers, we're following the law. And so I kind of called bullshit on that. I don't know if you can cuss on this.
No, you can. I do a lot.
Okay. And I told her I thought it was bullshit, and went out, and I've been doing both, working to change legislation as well as partnering with the Cupcake Girls to uplift the voices of our clients and make sure that they're heard.
Yeah. I've had similar interactions with, completely different situation, obviously, but I've always been very vocal about things that I believe in as well. And I remember I had an interaction with my high school principal because there were things that I felt were wrong in the school system. I feel like the school system is fucked in so many ways, to be completely transparent. And so I came to him. I was like 16 or 17 once I realized like something's not sitting right with me here, and I came to him and I was super emotional because it was all kind of like I think it was just like a turning point in my life where I kind of realized like the world is not fair, and that was hard for me to accept.
Totally.
And so I went to him, and I remember like I sat there and I was talking to him for like 2 hours, and I remember looking at him and thinking like, I literally asked him, I'm like, why does this not bother you? I'm like, you're in a position of power, and why don't you want to do more about this? And he said something to me like, Destiny, there's a time in your life when like moral victories stop being important, you know, and I still remember that, you know, because I think that that's you just throwing in the towel. I think that that's a personal philosophy, a personal perspective, and I think that there's a lot of people in positions of power that do have that perspective that are kind of just like, well, there's nothing I can do about it.
Yeah.
And I hate that. So I feel the pain there, you know.
It's sad because so much of that sentiment, it comes from just complete apathy, which I believe is burnout.
Right.
It's people just not taking care of themselves and falling victim to secondary trauma and not building patterns of resiliency within themselves so that they can keep up the work, because those moral victories do matter, as we know.
Yeah. I also think that, have you ever heard of this thing called hubris syndrome?
Tell me everything.
So it's basically, it happens to people that acquire, there's a few certain like factors or requirements that you have to meet, but it's like people that have had power for a long time, that power has gone virtually unchecked, and there's like a lot of like prestige in their position or something like that. And basically the syndrome is people who acquire that kind of power lose all the skills that they needed to get there in the first place.
Wow.
So they have like a less nuanced read of people. They're apathetic. They, they care generally less about other people. They did like an experiment where they were asked to draw an E on their forehead, and people that had a lot of power and were very narcissistic and selfish drew it backwards to everyone else, but straight to themselves. So like they could see it when they're looking at themselves in the mirror, but when other people are reading it, it's backwards. And it was the opposite for people that were more like sympathetic. And
that is fascinating.
Yeah. So I just think it has to do with the human condition and power in general, you know? But, anyway, it's kind of a tangent there. But what sort of, I saw on your website that you have an outreach, a referral, and a case management program. So what are each of those things? Can you just give a little more detail?
Yeah, totally. So we have an advocacy program that is run by our program directors. They're phenomenal. Brie, Ronnie, and Cruz, a little shout out. But what's really cool is that they will put our volunteer advocates through an 18-hour training, and then put them through 1 hour of continued training every other week, in what we have decided is called like supervision. And those advocates are the people that I was speaking to, that are meeting with our clients after they fill out a support request, and they're saying, okay, you want to work off of some goals. So we utilize something called a SMART Goals program. And what that is it's specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. Wow, I did that. I'm so proud of myself. Goals. And so we'll work through a list with our clients and sit down with them and say, like, okay, what's your goal? Cool. Let's name it specifically. How can we attain this? Let's measure it out. And we've been finding wonderful results in that. So clients can be within that program anywhere from 6 to 9 months usually, but truly we don't set an end date on our client experience. So if the clients always have goals that they're able to achieve or wanting to achieve in their life, and they're working on something with their advocate, we won't tell them that they have to leave our program, which is pretty cool. Right. And then not something that I had experienced in other nonprofits. There was always this like, 3 months in, you got to go, or 6 months in, you got to go. And I hate that. So I'm really proud to work in an organization that values the humanness of people. Right. And then our referral program is when somebody fills out a support request and they have one thing that they're needing. They're not necessarily looking to have an ongoing relationship with a volunteer advocate, but they're really just wanting to get either a financial grant or a washing machine or a car getting fixed or a record expunged. And so that client would meet with a volunteer advocate for probably about 2 weeks, like 1 to 2 weeks. or longer if they decide to switch and go to the advocacy program. And truly, we're just giving them a referral of someone in our system that we've realized is like a community referral that could fit what the client is looking for. And then we say, like, okay, awesome, have fun. The other program is actually our mentorship program. So people that have passed through our advocacy program and they're still kind of wanting to hang out with someone and just get the community, but they're not necessarily working on any goals. And so that person would be passed into our mentorship program for just one-on-one mentorship. That usually happens 1 to 2 times a month that they meet with that mentor.
Okay, great. So you're kind of covering a lot of bases there.
Yes, yeah.
I like that there's not a time limit because it's just human beings don't work like that. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like that's one thing that I've always actually struggled about with therapy. You know what I mean? Because it's like, oh, here's our 50 minutes. And you do come back, you know, that's the important thing about therapy is you have to come consistently for it to be beneficial for that reason. But it feels, you know, so unnatural to be like, okay, start talking about all your trauma and then you're done and you have to go and do everything the rest of your day. You know what I mean? So I like that there's not a time limit on it. So is your guys' primary focus like victims of sex trafficking or just people in sex work in general, or like who is it?
Yeah, so we work with people that are survivors, victims of sex trafficking, or somebody that might consider themselves to be a non-consensual sex worker. And then we also work with consensual sex workers. And I really, truly try to explain those as 2 separate things.
Right, for sure.
So sex trafficking and non-consensual sex work, those are lumped into one piece that we do. So we'll provide counseling, referrals, advocacy, partnerships, record expungements for somebody who's been trafficked throughout multiple states and now they're having a hard time getting a job, as well as advocacy within our bills that we're trying to get passed within our state. So we just finished working on a bill called SB 164 that was working in the state of Nevada to make sure that people would not be arrested for being sex trafficked, which blows my mind. When I moved here, oh my gosh, I heard about it 3 days after I moved here and I was like, where did I move? Like, what is happening? That bill actually didn't pass. It didn't pass, and so send us all of the positive thoughts because Swan, Nevada, as well as Suede, 2 sex work-led organizations, invited the Cupcake Girls as well as other businesses and notable people in our state to go with them to speak to DAs. So people in the DA's office and ask them to stop prosecuting prostitution charges, and we're hoping that will fix that issue. We were able to achieve that with Mike Schmidt in Multnomah County in Oregon, and so we're hoping that we can do that here with the DAs.
So you kind of have to go do it yourself since the state won't do it for you.
That's right.
Well, maybe some of what that lady said has some truth. Like, you got to go through grassroots. You know what I mean? Unfortunately, like any sort of bureaucracy I've just learned is just such a pain in the ass.
Totally.
But it doesn't mean you give up, you know? Do you guys help children that are victims of sex trafficking, or is it just mainly like adults or minors not included?
That's a great question. So we work with 18 and older.
Okay. Yeah. So is there a reason for that? Is there just like it gets more complicated if it's children, or how does that work?
We're just not trained in it. The legalities surrounding it and the training that is necessary, we don't have it. And so our focus is 18 and older, yeah.
Okay.
Especially since we work, one of our client bases is the consensual sex work.
Right.
We really try to make sure that we're holding that.
Right.
And it's hard enough to hold both. So adding on another wing, we're just not ready for that yet.
Right. Maybe one day.
Who knows?
So I know you were mentioning, you know, how in Oregon you saw people actually being, you know, arrested for being sex trafficked or being a prostitute. Because I took a class where we learned about how that happens quite a bit. How often have you seen that here in our city? Or have you seen that happen here? Or have people come to you, clients said, like, hey, this happened to me, like, I don't want to go to the police, or I don't want this because, you know, I could be arrested? Or is it something that you mainly just saw in Oregon?
That's definitely happening all over the United States.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Do you feel like a lot of people are scared to admit that they're being sex trafficked for that reason or other reasons? Or do you find that most people are like, help me, like, I want to get out of here?
I think sometimes people don't know that they're being sex trafficked because of the way that our media especially has portrayed sex trafficking. It's really seen as this, like, someone is kidnapped off the street, maybe put into a trunk of a car or something like that. Movies like Taken with Liam Neeson in it. Yeah. I can never say his last name. Neeson. Yeah. So people, when they think of sex trafficking, they often think of that. What they're not really usually thinking about is that power and control wheel. I don't know if you happen to look at that, but really trying to look at sex trafficking is so similar actually to domestic violence.
Right.
And so if we're looking at sex trafficking, we're looking and talking to someone about, like, hey, what's your experience? You know, what's going on in your life? And they're like, well, my boyfriend or girlfriend or mother or auntie or grandmother has control of my money. They force me to work in sex work. You know, they have control over my time. They have control of my ID. Those are things that people don't realize, like, oh, hey, I'm being sex trafficked. They just realize, like, that they're in an unhealthy relationship with someone, or maybe they don't. And so the goal for us is not to put judgment on somebody for an experience that they might be having, but truly just giving them the tools that they're asking for, so that as they become more themselves and as, like, they become healthy within themselves, whatever they decide health is, they're able to come to those conclusions on their own. But that being said, a big part of what we do is the consensual sex work. And that's actually probably the vast majority of the clientele that we have is consensual sex work. So people that are saying, like, I want to do this. This works for me. This works for my schedule. I'm a single parent. I need to be able to do this. I'm paying off my student debt. Debt is a massive thing in our country. And so having the accessibility of sex work and the flexibility of the schedule, it's working for them. And so we work really hard to make sure that they feel supported in their pursuits.
Okay. So in terms of, like, the sex trafficking, because this is something that, you know, I have a considerable amount of information on, but I'm by no means, like, an expert or anything, you know what I mean? So I'll admit that, you know, in my head, and because I think it was just, you know, maybe because of the quarantine and we had nothing to do and it became, like, a huge thing, like the Jeffrey Epstein thing came back up during quarantine. I watched, like, the documentaries and stuff like that, and I saw about, like, how there's also, like, grooming, or you don't realize that this person is, you know, going to kidnap you. They might start with something small, like, oh, come, let me buy you this, come to this event with me. So more often than not, you're saying it's someone that they know than a stranger, kind of like how it is with rape or domestic abuse.
That's correct.
Okay, that's interesting, because I didn't know that either. Mm-hmm. You know, in my head, and it's something that I have to worry about, you know, as a young female here, especially in our city. And I work in an environment where that probably crosses our path more often than in other industries. You have people with money, you have girls that are coming intoxicated. You know, if someone has some way gets, like, drugs into the club, they're roofing people. So it crosses my path more. We actually have, like, signs on our doors in the club that says, like, if you're being sex trafficked, like, contact a security officer, like, immediately. So it's something that I have to think about more probably than, you know, maybe a male living in the Midwest or something. And the way that I conceptualized it was always like, oh, someone's going to kidnap me and take me somewhere. You know what I mean? I had an interaction over the summer last year where I was flying by myself, and I was having all sorts of problems with my flight, like with my luggage, with, you know, I didn't know where my luggage was. I was nervous that I was going to miss my flight. I was crying. I was by myself. I was on the phone. I was crying. And, like, someone that worked there approached me and was asking me, like, what's wrong. And, like, he worked for American Airlines. but there's this thought in the back of my head that's like, oh my God, like, what if he sees that, like, I'm young and vulnerable and he's going to sex traffic me? It's always, like, in my head, you know what I mean? Because I've seen that happen to people, you know? That's probably the glamorized media version of it, but I know it still does happen, you know?
It's interesting that you bring gender into the equation, because I would say that that sex trafficking, violence, it doesn't know gender.
Yeah, right.
And so right now, actually, they're saying about 1 in 4 of people that are trafficked are actually male. And truly, they're not really doing any real studies, and I'd like to see studies on, like, different gender identities as well. But I'd expect those numbers to go up much higher because of patriarchy. I think that a lot of people that maybe see themselves as male, or that are male, that they don't feel like they can.
It's like embarrassing for them to admit, or a stigma.
Maybe, yeah. So because of stigma, because of colonialism, the patriarchy. I mean, we could go on. I think that, yeah, violence doesn't know. Violence doesn't know if you're female, male, or if you don't identify with any gender. Violence is violence.
Right. There's a lot of issues like that just in research in general, where there's underreporting and there's nothing that you can really do about it. You know, we learned about domestic violence in a few of my classes, and it gives you, whenever it gives you a male number, like a figure for, like, this is the number of males that have reported this, it says, you know, give or take, because there's definitely underreporting because of the stigma attached, like, you know, especially with, like, female rapists, or, you know, females that are committing domestic violence against a male. Like, you see a lot of underreporting there because of the same reasons, you know?
It's interesting because a lot of our clients that may be trafficked by their mother, their grandmother, their girlfriend, their wife, their sister, it's so hard to wrap around their head sometimes. They're like, oh shit, I'm being trafficked, because it's female, and, like, the gender has always been put on a trafficker as, like, this male pimp,
right?
And I think, like, again, violence doesn't know a gender, so I think it's important just that I say that.
Yeah. So I know that Las Vegas in particular is a city that struggles with sex trafficking. It's just like a city, it's unique, and I've lived here my whole life. I was born and raised here. So there's just a certain, like, a part of our culture is sex, you know, and that goes to both ends of the spectrum, in a negative way and in a positive way. So, you know, it's a city where you probably see more sex workers, see more sex positivity, but I also know that we're really high in sex trafficking. Do you know if that's a part of the reason why an organization was started here? I don't know which one came first, or if there's more around the country, but...
Yeah, so we have a branch here, and then we have a branch in Oregon, in Portland, Oregon, and I think it's probably some of that. I know that the founder was on a vacation with her husband at the time when she started the organization, and she was introduced to sex work truly through AVN, which is kind of like the Emmys for porn, and so I think that's why she was introduced, and I think that's why she moved here, was because she saw that sex work was so flashy here. That being said, street-based sex work, prostitution, camming, escorts, things like that, they are everywhere. And I would challenge people, if they don't think they know anybody that's a sex worker, they're probably wrong. And so I think, like, especially as like things like ManyVids or MyFreeCams, as they are growing in popularity, I think that a lot of people know sex workers.
Right. I know sex workers. Yeah. So, and it's just, I think it's maybe because it's becoming less stigmatized with things like OnlyFans. Actually, the last episode that I did on the show was with someone who was running an OnlyFans account. So, you know, there's one. You guys have all heard from one now. So, really quickly, what is just to kind of break it down for myself, admittedly, but also for everyone else, the difference between sex work, prostitution, sex trafficking. Like, I know a lot of it probably has to do with the consent part of it, but, what are some of the similarities and differences between those things?
Yeah, sure. So sex work, consensual sex work, is when you are deciding that you would like to trade something that could be stamped XXX with for money or housing or whatever it is that you're wanting to trade for what you're needing. And so that could look like camming. It can look like street-based prostitution. It can look like escorting. It can look like dancing. It can look like any number of things. Literally, like the list goes on. Dom stuff, foot fetish work. Like there's like so much. So anything that you could put like XXX on, and like the person is choosing that work. Sex work, non-consensual sex work, or sex trafficking is when you are not choosing that for yourself. And we really think that it's important that we work with both communities, because so many times people, they will talk about sex work and then they'll talk about sex trafficking as if they're the same thing, and they're not. And so by us working with these two very separate communities, we're able to uplift the voices of sex workers and ensure that people understand what consensual sex work is.
So as far as prostitution goes, basically, if it is that person saying, this is what I want to do, it's considered sex work. But if they have like whoever, if it's a family member, friend, a pimp that is forcing them to be in the situation, is that considered sex trafficking then?
So anything that is consensual, if you're choosing sex work, then you're a sex worker. If you are not choosing sex work and sex work is being pushed on you, then you are
being trafficked.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I took a class last year at UNLV in the fall that briefly touched on prostitution. It was a human sexuality class, so we touched on sex work. There was a whole chapter in the book on sex work. And I just wanted to read everyone a snippet from my book that I read regarding what sort of factors contribute to someone entering into prostitution. So this is from a book called Different Sexual Worlds, Contemporary Case Studies of Sexuality. And on page 95, it says, quote, often a family history of abuse, low self-esteem, no perceived options, and domineering males combine to form this unnerving scenario, end quote. So I remember reading that and thinking that there's still so many people that just don't understand that. You know what I mean? And, that's not to say that everyone that's in sex work is, they have no outlet, or it's their only option, or they're doing it because they're being abused, or they're doing it for these negative reasons, because I know that it's empowering for a lot of people. I think it's in this book, it was specifically talking about like street work, like prostitution. And it was published a while ago, to be completely honest. But, there's so many people that I feel like blame the woman or blame the sex worker, or have this really negative perception of, oh, she deserves that. Or, oh, if this is the line of work that she's choosing, then she deserves anything that comes his or her, whatever way. So I'm wondering, what are some of the biggest things that you've run into that people don't understand about sex trafficking, or like big misconceptions, or some of the stereotypes or just negative perceptions that you've run into regarding this issue? Because that's just some of the ones that I've run into,
I mean, Destiny, I have been doing this for 9 years. I would need a longer podcast.
Just the big ones then.
Big ones. That sex work, anybody who's engaging in sex work is being sex trafficked. They're being coerced into that. That's a massive misconception. That anyone who could want to be a sex worker must have encountered like intense abuse. That trigger warning, talking about rape. But if you are assaulted as a sex worker, that you were asking for it. I mean, the list goes on. It's incredibly infuriating. And to be honest, I am speaking for my staff and our team. It's one of the things that like keeps us in this work. I truly think that because of the way that our society has been structured and the way that we are all participating in allowing that society to remain structured as such, we're perpetuating these acts of violence and these words that are violent, that they do create violence for sex workers. And so that's why I am pro decrim, and so is the Cupcake Girls, because we really need to get at the root of why are these laws in place, and why are we okay with these societal structures, with these things? Why are we accepting them? This is so similar to your conversation with your principal, where you're just like, well, I don't understand. Why are we okay with this? We need to not be okay with it and work to change it.
So in an idealistic world, what does it look like for you in terms of a safe sex work environment? Is it elimination of sex trafficking? Is it decriminalization? Like what do you feel like is attainable that is not happening right now?
I want to say that, like, because sex work and sex trafficking are two separate things, they also come with their very separate issues. And so I don't think that eliminating the stigma on sex work is going to eliminate sex trafficking. That being said, eliminating the stigma on sex work means uplifting the voices of sex workers, making sure that people can hear them and hear exactly what they're asking for and exactly what they are saying that they need in their communities. And currently the voices that we have uplifted and the voices that we are hearing are saying decriminalizing sex work is the first step, but it's definitely not the last step. I think that working underneath the colonial and patriarchy, like the structure that we have in our nation, but also in our world, they're creating a really unhealthy environment for a lot of people, not just sex workers. But in order for us to really get at the root of why sex work is demonized, we really need to take a hard look at the patriarchy. We really, really do. We need to take a hard look at the positions of power and what we're okay with. We know that senators, that doctors, dentists, lawyers, like these people, these higher level people, senators, presidents, utilize sex workers. So why are they so demonized? I don't get it. It is so confusing to me.
What do you think is, because it's not, there's other women that also like demonize sex work, and I don't disagree that it has to do with a history of white men being in charge in our country. That's not to chastise anyone who's a white man. It's just like the facts of history. But what do you think?
As a white man, you would also agree with that and want to change that structure.
Right. Well, I mean, it's hard for people who already have power to want to give up that power.
Totally.
You know what I mean? So that's a whole other conversation. But what I also think it's probably rooted in things like religious beliefs and amongst a lot of different religions. I don't know the extent. Like I said, I was raised Catholic. I grew up in a Catholic school. So I know how a lot of Christian denominations feel about sex work, which is a huge percentage of the world, obviously. I don't know enough about how other faiths like Hinduism or Islam or Buddhism, I'm not sure how they view sex work. I know a little bit. I took a spirituality class this past semester, and we learned about how, in Hinduism, sexuality is actually considered like a part of the divine. Like it's something to be explored and enjoyed, not just within the confines of marriage. And like even in Catholic school, we were taught, sex is something that you only do in order to conceive a child, right? So I think that also could contribute to it, you know what I mean? And then on top of that, you have people's individual life experiences. So it's like the way that, and this applies to any issue, the way that I see it is, you know, you are here and you have these firm beliefs. You have these things that you just know in your core are right. Like you've dedicated basically your entire life to helping sex workers, to this cause, to changing the laws, changing the system. And then there's somebody else out there who feels like everything that you're doing is completely wrong, which I'm sure you've run into those people in the 9 years that you've been doing this. Mm-hmm. So it's like, how do you reconcile that? Like, how do you overcome that, especially if it's enough people that are preventing the law from changing? You know what I mean? It's not like we can just say, oh, fuck them. They suck then. Like, we don't need them. Because I feel like you do need them.
Yep,
you know what I mean?
That's exactly right. I think it's really encouraging humility in each other. I know I don't consider that like I am helping sex workers, but I truly think that I'm working to uplift the voices of sex workers and to follow through on what they are requesting of me and of our organization. So I just want to clarify that. But also, I think it's important to note that I have very dear friends that are Republicans. I have very dear friends that are very conservative, and we have conversations and we talk through these things, and we try to both be open-minded. And I think I wouldn't be able to be in this work as long as I have, and I would not be able to be trusted by the communities that I am, and we as an organization would not be able to be trusted if we were not continually asking for feedback on how we can be better and asking for feedback on how we could do things differently. I don't disagree with you that we need everyone's opinions and we need everybody at the table. I think that it has to be done in a really careful way, because opinions are fine as long as they are not hurting someone. And the opinions of sex work being evil or predatory or whatever, they are killing people. Those opinions are killing people. They're separating families. They're putting kids into foster care. They should not be in foster care, especially when we've known for years now, decades in fact, that children should not be in foster care unless there is extreme need for that. Families are being separated. People are dying because of the opinions and the strong beliefs of others. And so it's important that we all have our opinions, we all have our beliefs, we all have those things, but we are open to hearing about how those beliefs need to be different in order for everyone to be safe. And if our opinions are more important than someone else's safety, that's not a conversation I can be a part of. Mm-hmm. And I make sure that that's understood. But I do think that we should always engage in every conversation with humility and ask for those moments and ask for those conversations, and not turn people away from relationship with us or from a conversation with us because they disagree with something, unless it's hurting other people.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that that's where it gets tricky, because that's I think it comes down to a question of values. You know what I mean? The way that I look at it is, and just what I've realized from personal experience dealing with people that don't care about what I care about, is you can come in with all the convictions in the world and the best intentions, but if somebody doesn't value what you value, it's going to, I just feel like you could end up at a dead end, right? So for me, it's about, so I know this isn't what I believe personally, but I'm trying to think and play devil's advocate here on...
You're trying to ask critical questions.
Right. So there's people that I know that see, sex work as something that is threatening them. Whether it's their concept of family, their concept of tradition, their values, if they value, being conservative with your body, or for them, if it's a real strong belief, I think it's becoming less common, but, no sex before marriage, or you're only supposed to have sex to conceive a child. For them, that's a threat to their whole belief system. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And you can't blame people for all that they know, for all that they grew up in.
That's
You
right.
know what I mean? So how do you, it would be like someone coming to you and trying to convince you why everything you're doing is wrong. You know what I mean? It's just the complete opposite end of the spectrum. And, thankfully, I believe that most people are not extremists. You know what I mean? So there is the vast majority of people that fall in the middle. And it's about figuring out what your common values are. You know what I mean? Like, as a human being. And it's unfortunately become idealistic to think like that. You know what I mean? Whenever you start to bring up, like, oh, like, kumbaya, like, we're all humans first, like, we should choose love, like, people roll their eyes and turn their heads away, and they shut down. But it's like, really, and I'm trying to figure this out as just a human in general. You know what I mean? I am 22, so I don't have, like, a ton of life experience, but it's like, what is something that is more important to everybody than anything else? You know what I mean? What is gonna, you say something and that matters more to anyone else than any of this other shit. You know what I mean? Like the labels, the party systems, the religions, what is underneath everybody? That's kind of like my big question. My life philosophy is figuring out what's making everybody tick underneath all this other shit that is not really important. And I just feel like, that's my goal as a human being, is to figure out, okay, how am I going to connect this person who is maybe like a white male, grew up in Alabama, with this black trans person that grew up in New York. You know what I mean? There is something in common there. So I feel like the problem with the world right now is that we're not focused on that. We're not focused on finding what's underneath all of that. You know what I mean? We're putting out these messages that and all these different labels and all these different, belief systems that are like, this is why I'm different from you. This is why we're not alike. This is why I support this person and not that person. And it's like, it's hard because it's in the human condition to do that, to separate, to find in groups and out groups. And this is like my internal battle, my internal struggle is, are we going to throw in the towel and be like, this is just how humans are? Am I going to be a realist? Am I going to be a pessimist? Or am I going to fight through all that shit and see if it's possible to do life different? To be like, no, all that stuff doesn't matter. Like, this is actually what matters at the end of the day. And I feel like there is one philosophy that I have, because it's hard for me to get attached to any sort of belief system, you know what I mean, for that reason. I always try to choose love in any way that I can. You know what I mean? Like, not every single day. It's hard. Like, sometimes you're just like, you want to be like, fuck you, get away from me. But, on average, for big things, for big life decisions, for who I'm voting for, how I want to go about a conflict, it's about what's going to make this other person feel good. What's going to make this other person feel safe? What's going to make this other person feel valued? Because it ends up coming back to you twofold. Mm-hmm. Like, and I feel like people who have been disconnected from that for a long time forget that, or people that don't have love in their life can't even imagine what that looks like. You know what I mean? So for me, it's about, you got to figure out, you got to be vulnerable. Like, as shitty as it is and as scary as it is, like, I've never regretted trying to make somebody else feel good. You know what I mean? I've only ever regretted making somebody else feel like shit. Mm-hmm. So there's my long little tangent there. I know you guys have, your slogan is love without agenda, mm-hmm. right? So what is that? Basically, like, you just put love into the world and don't expect anything in return?
So when we're working with our clients, we really make sure that it's understood that there is no judgment, truly is what that is. And I think it's interesting, like, I guess I can understand, like, the thought process that you have of, like, okay, if I can figure out what's the thing that's making everyone tick, but then there are those nuances, right? Like, I don't know if you've ever heard of, like, personality tests.
Yeah, of course.
So then everyone has their own pieces that make them tick. Like, something that's motivating for me may not be motivating for you. But I truly do think that the way to change the world is through relationships. Like, I think it's, like, pursuing and, like, building relationships with people and, like, understanding each other and by modeling acceptance. There's an amazing woman named Emma Sullivan who worked with people coming out of ISIS concentration camps for 2 years. And she talks about how we all have trauma. We all have secondary trauma that we're experiencing, and learning to build those resiliency loops inside of ourselves rather than building loops of trauma, and then ways that we can maintain our nervous system, because actually the way that I enter a room, your nervous system will be affected by mine and vice versa. And so if you're showing up and you're angry, pissed, or whatever, and then I'm calm, it helps regulate your nervous system. And that's just the way that our bodies are. Mm-hmm. Anyway, she's done some fascinating work on that. And I truly believe that, like, through those relationships, we actually, like, can do it, because everyone's going to be different. But if we actually take time with one another, we just need a lot of focused people. Right. It's going to be a lot of healed healers.
Yeah. I mean, I just graduated with my degree in communications, so I firmly believe in the relationships thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I've seen all these studies on, like, the things that genuinely make people happy is not necessarily what we value as a culture. That's right. You know what I mean? So the amount of money that you're making compared to the actual work that you're doing, like, it's just not even equivalent. Like, the type of work you're doing and the value that you see in your work is just, like, exponentially more important than how much money you're making. Your relationships are another one. I read this book by Jonathan Haidt. It's really good. I recommend it to anybody who cares about being happy at all. It's called...
Everyone's like, taking notes.
Yeah. It's called The Happiness Hypothesis. So it's this really in-depth, realistic book on what makes people happy. And there's this thing in there called the hedonic treadmill, where if you're chasing material things, each time you get there, it's less and less satisfying, because it's like, it's actually the process itself that is satisfying. Like, hitting the goal, you get, like, a big rush of dopamine for a second, but it's, you know, the sum, like the parts, and the sum of the parts is just so much more important, because you're getting your little rushes of dopamine along the way. You know what I mean? So that's why, you know, you get your paycheck and it's like, wow, I'm a millionaire. I made all this money. But what are you doing in the meantime? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? How are your relationships? And it did a study on, like, how people that were super, like, workaholic, even though that they were very wealthy, if they had poor relationships, there was a woman who had, like, cancer. And she was, like, an African-American woman living, like, in some state, like Missouri or something. And they compared her, you know, serotonin and dopamine levels to this, like, millionaire, like, CEO of a company. And she was way happier than him because of her relationships, because of the, you know, affection and the comfort and the, you know, that's the human condition. You know what I mean? That's why I believe in love and relationships and all that shit. Like, I know I'm still realistic about, you know, that's hard for some people to maneuver, you know, because of life, because of whatever has happened to them.
Their experience being raised by somebody who maybe didn't model that for them.
Right. And that's real hard to break out of. Like, it's, how do you break out of something when it's all you've ever known? You don't know what you don't know. Yeah. So, you know, just expecting people to be better than all they've ever seen is hard, you know what I mean? So, like, I believe in this message that you're talking about, where you be the model for somebody else, because what if that's the first time in their life they've been like, oh, it's different than this?
That's right.
You know what I mean? So I respect it. Yeah.
I want to say too, I mean, I think that I'm a prime example, actually, and so are my parents. I grew up fundamentalist Christian.
Okay.
And when I was 16 was when I made that friend, one of my first friends, because I was homeschooled. And I had the experience of, confronting the modesty culture, purity culture, all of that, and really seeing, like, her as human. Mm-hmm. And then my parents, my dad's actually a major in the Army, and so very conservative. When I first started with the Cupcake Girls, they were like, what is happening? Like, this girl, what is going on? And now they're one of our biggest donors, one of our biggest monthly donors. And I truly, I've seen it, and I believe in it, and I think that, like, relationships are going to change this world. I really do believe that.
Yeah. Fingers crossed.
Let's do this.
So on another note, I can personally say I am like a giver. I am a fixer. I love helping people, and I deeply empathize with others. Like, it's a boundary that I've had to learn to maneuver lately.
I hope so.
Yeah. But I make other people's pain my pain, and I just absorb it, like, to like the 100th level. Which only makes me want to help them even more. So it's like this cycle of being a fixer. But in my, like, personal experience, I've realized how much life that can suck out of you. Yeah. It hurts to see other people hurt. It's like one of the worst things. And I know in this field of work, you see a lot of people that are probably hurting. You know what I mean? So does seeing that pain, like, I know it's been 9 years, so if it was more at the beginning than it is now, that's fine. But does seeing that pain really get to you sometimes? And, like, how do you balance, like, not taking that home with you? I'm sure, like, this is where holistic balance might come in, but...
So holistic balance is one of our core values, and I think that, I think I'm still learning. I think that the more life experience that I have and the more that I see, the more that I am devastated and then have to reconcile that. And I think that I do that by building out patterns of care for myself and patterns of care for my family. I'm a single parent with a 6-year-old. And we just moved here from another state. So she doesn't really know anybody. And as we're saying, relationships are so important, right? So trying to give her that relationship too. I think I'm still learning a lot of therapy. And I encourage our team to participate in therapy. The Body Keeps Score is an excellent book that talks about how your body actually will absorb the trauma or the experience that your body has had. Trauma Stewardship is an excellent book. Emma Sullivan, like I had mentioned earlier, she does phenomenal trainings, and she just finished a secondary trauma training with us and our team. I think it's you have to pursue health for yourself. And that has to be as big of a deal as it is to pursue health for others. And if it's not, you're going to burn out, and you're actually going to hurt the people that you're wanting to be available for. And so it's really important, like we were talking about, the nervous system regulation and developing these patterns of care for ourselves. So whether it would be, like, for me, like I said, it's therapy. I have Talkspace, which I so recommend because it really works with my schedule, where I can just text out a super long message to a therapist, and then they'll respond, and it's been great. And then we have video sessions every week too. I love it. Also, Headspace is an amazing app that I really recommend. Getting outside. There's so much science behind getting your body outside, getting moving. Even if it's 15 minutes in the morning, 15 minutes at night, it does wonders for your brain. And then making sure that I'm maintaining those relationships. And those are qualities of care that we really, really encourage our team to develop within themselves. I really encourage days off. If somebody comes into work and they just don't seem like themselves, and I'll ask them, like, hey, can you take a day? Will you take a day? I'd love for you to take a day. Can you leave early? Can you cancel a meeting? So the push to be, like, the best giver isn't here. And I think that will help us in our longevity as an organization.
Have you had days where you're just have you hit burnouts before?
Oh, yeah.
And that's how you learned this stuff?
Oh, yes. Oh, my gosh. I have struggled with depression. I actually have a panic disorder that I developed as a kid. And so struggling with that, and then struggling with depression. Like I said, single parent. So going through divorce while working here was phenomenal. And so I think like being honest about trigger warning, thoughts of suicide, being honest and reaching out to build communities of care for yourself is really, really important when you're doing this work.
Right, for sure.
Yeah.
It's just heavy stuff all the time, so
It is, but it can also, it's so important, and I actually have a gratitude journal that I write in every day, and I really encourage other people to do that as well. Just making sure that as we're going through every day, yes, the day can be heavy as fuck, but there could be so much beauty in it as well. Like, on one of my worst days, I happened to, like, pass by this lady who was, like, hugging her kid while they were walking their puppy, and it was just so beautiful. And so I wrote that down in my gratitude journal. I was like, you can always find something. You just really have to be intentional about looking for it.
Right. And even, like, all the worst things that I've ever gone through in my life, and I always say this, I hate that the universe or the world, whatever it is out there, works like this. I don't, that's the big question. Why is there suffering instead of there not being suffering? And I've had a million different conversations with a million different people. A lot of religions like to explain it one way. People explain it the other way. You have people that say, oh, this is God showing you couldn't know joy without pain. And then you have atheists that are like, because nothing means anything. You know what I mean? So it's like this big spectrum, but it's what we have. So there's nothing we can do about it. Suffering exists. So one thing that I have realized is that all the worst things that I've ever gone through have made me more wholesome. I don't know why we have to lose so many different parts to become wholesome again. It makes no sense to me, philosophically. But I have become, there's like things that I could never know, perspectives that I could never hold without having gone through those things. I have a tattoo on my spine, on my back. It's a lightning bolt. And a really hard year that I had in my life with, like, 2018, that summer I was just fucked mentally. Like, I had just never been to that place before. And, like, that summer there was a lot of lightning storms, kind of like the weather we're having today. And I would come home from work, and there would be days where I would sit there and I would just cry and, like, watch the lightning storms, because something about nature just makes you feel bigger than yourself. And the reason I got this tattoo is because I realized my life that year was like a lightning bolt. It's like they're very destructive. They're so fucking scary and destructive, right? But they're beautiful at the same time. Like, it's so pretty to see, like, a strike of lightning in the sky. Yeah. And that's what my life was that year. It was super destructive, but I really grew because of it. You know what I mean? So, anything bad, that I see other people going through, right? It hurts me. But I'm just sitting here like, hopefully that's a part of their path that's going to make them into something just amazing. You know what I mean? That's how sometimes I have to cope sometimes. Otherwise, it's just like, well, here comes nihilism and depression and nothing means anything. So, I get it. Have you ever had, like, a situation or a client where, like, you really connected with them on a personal level, or just maybe, like, a person that you met through this organization that really impacted your life or changed your perspective? Obviously, probably your friend from when you were 16. But I don't know what it's, because, like, with therapy, there has to be, like, a certain boundary between you and your client. Is that the same here? Like, has there ever been a situation where you're like, I am just too emotionally invested in this person to be further involved in this case?
Oh, totally. I've had to give up clients many times. And in fact, I don't work with clients anymore because I know that about myself, that I get really emotionally invested and it's not healthy for me. So it's easier, it's better for the organization as a whole if I'm more on the operational side. For sure. I think that there have been so many people over this journey with Cupcake Girls that have impacted my life in so many beautiful ways. And I want to say that specifically it's the people that are willing to give us the constructive criticism that we need to grow. So I think the sex workers, I think every sex worker that has given us any sort of feedback, constructive criticism, or just blatantly like not dug us for whatever reason and told us, we've been able to take that feedback, sit with it, and grow. And so I think that those moments have been the hardest and most beautiful for me and for us.
If there's one piece of advice or one message that you want to leave with people regarding anything that we've covered today, if there's something that's super like important or like a one overarching thing that you want to leave with people, what would it be?
Donate to the Cupcake Girls.
Okay, there we go. Yeah. Marketing.
Also, I think we need to hold space for one another, and we need to enter into conversations assuming positive intent and really wanting to learn. So we can't do that without taking care of ourselves. And there's a lot of people out there, especially right now, especially after 2020, mentally, that haven't had an opportunity to really take care of themselves. And so I'd encourage everyone to really love themselves and take care of themselves, whatever that looks like for them. Whether it's, watching something on Netflix, going outside, going hiking, masturbating, I don't know. But, whatever it takes, just, do that. Do what feeds you so that we can make a better world together.
You can't pour from an empty cup.
That's right.
Yeah. All right, Amy, well, thank you again for your time and candor regarding these issues. For anyone who is interested in volunteering for this organization, any of the resources they offer, donating, or just simply continuing the conversation, I'll have the Cupcake Girls contact information available to you all on both my Instagram and my YouTube channel. I appreciate all of you taking the time to listen and educate yourselves on an issue that is so incredibly prominent, not only in our city, but in our country and our world. And I look forward to chatting with all of you this week about the episode. And I'll see you all again in 2 weeks to talk more elephants. Thank you.